Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It's baseball season almost. Well, sort of, kind of. And once it gets here, you'll probably be sorry it arrived. Luke Jones is here. And, you know, Luke, we've talked so much about the Orioles and baby birds and young players and pitching and whether they're going to lose 99 or 101, and we'll get into all of that. But this is the first year, and I think Rob Manfred has tried to youngen up the game, freshen up the game, speed up the game. We talk about all the things that happened in the 2017 and 18 seasons that have sort of moved toward strikeouts, home runs. Guys aren't taking pitches. Pitchers throw more strikes. There's much more about velocity, much more about matchup. All the Saber nerdity out there that you love so much. This is the year that it at least feels like they're starting to move the players not only off of money, but also off of the rules stuff and pitch clock and all of these things that Rob Manfred wants to be known for his tenure as commissioner, to change the game and make the game younger. Well, here we go, and you'll have an opportunity to do that. And I know you live closer to the York Revolution than to the Orioles, but this is, if you're a baseball fan and have been a fan all your life like I have, these are going to be the things, much like for my father, when the three-point shot came and the shot clock came in basketball, it changed everything about basketball, right?
It really does, and I think that's what's interesting. And before we dive into what the Atlantic League is going to be doing this year and discussing some of the points and some of the ideas I like, other ideas I don't like, it's kind of this mishmash of 6 or 7 different ideas, which, if you're talking in terms of the scientific process, it's problematic to know what exactly is working and what isn't. But I want to make a clear distinction here because we talk about it so much. We've talked about length of game for such a long time. We've talked about pace of play for several years now. And I think there needs to be a distinction here. And I'm going to use the analogy of movie watching. In my lifetime, I've seen the overall average length of movies, at least that I watch. And look, I'm not an Oscar, Academy Award winning or watching.
You've watched your fair share of Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey.
Yeah,
films,
I mean, I appreciate good movies, but I'm much more a Marvel, DC, superhero movie type of guy. I'm not. But my overall point is, over my lifetime, and I'm 35 now, I've seen movies gradually get longer in terms of just the average length of movies. When I was a kid, it felt like most movies were hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, hour and 45 maybe, and you'd have your exceptions to the rule, of course. Your Godfathers and classics and things of that nature.
Schindler's List, yes.
You're right. But I feel as I've gotten older, we've seen movies get longer, and my general rule of thumb that I always I share this with my brother, who I go to many of these movies with, and I say, it's tough for me to really embrace a movie that's going to be much longer than 2 hours. And are there movies that I love that are longer than 2 hours? Of course. But in a general sense,
I'm the worst guy in the world, dude, because I hit the DVR. I want to talk about stuff when it's happening, when I'm watching it. I want to interact, learn from it. I'm all into that.
It's tough to sit there that long, right? I mean, yeah.
I got to pee. I got to get some water. I got to text. You know what I mean? There's breaking news. I mean, Adam Jones signed with the Diamondbacks. Something happened. You know what I mean?
Sure. But there's just a general rule to that I want to be entertained. And we've spent so much time,
which brings us back to baseball.
right, sure. But we've spent so much time talking about length of game, but what really resonated with me last year, and I'm a stats guy. Numbers are something that I take to it, and that's why I'm such a big baseball fan. I mean, I can remember memorizing statistics off of baseball cards growing up, as many of us did. But for me, it's much more the action within the game. In the same way that I'll sit through a 2.5-hour movie if it's a great movie and I'm captivated by it. But I don't want to be sitting through a 2.5-hour movie if it drags and
By the way, and I tell Billick this all the time, this is why I don't get on boats, okay? Because once you get on the boat,
you can't get off, right?
You can't get off the boat. You know what I mean? So, like, wherever the boat's going, I'm going, and what if an hour and a half into the boat ride, I'm bored? You know what I mean? Like, I guess in the modern era, if I have Wi-Fi, I'm never bored, and I always have something to read and something to learn, and I can take a book, and I can just chill out and meditate and enjoy the sun, you know? But all that being said, as I get older and, I buried two fathers, and I look at it and watch my wife battle for her life, I don't have time to waste on an Orioles-Indians game on a Wednesday night if the Orioles are going to be 30 games under. I don't. I'm 50 years old. I've readily admitted that I'm doing this Baltimore positive thing because you're going to watch a lot more baseball than I'm going to watch this summer because I don't feel like it's part of my job anymore. I just don't. People don't come up to me on the street and demand that I watch baseball anymore, nor should I demand that they watch baseball anymore. And baseball knows this, and this is where they're trying to recapture me, get you more deeper into it, and maybe make a guy like your brother that doesn't have any use for it maybe at some point want to go to a game and sit next to you, right?
Yeah, and I think for me the key is young people. I mean, my brother's 31 years old. I don't.
He's a lost cause.
He's probably never going to become a huge baseball.
Hey, my son's your age, right? I mean,
sure.
I don't say that often, but my son and you are 11 months apart, and my son just doesn't, my son's much more into like learning stuff on the internet than he is learning, someone's whip,
Right, literally. Right. But my point is, and I'm going to go back to the number, I was getting ready to cite a statistic. Last year in Major League Baseball is the first time in Major League history there were more strikeouts than hits over the course of the entire season. It's the first time that's ever happened. And my point is, we've spent so much time talking about time of game, and we've made these tertiary changes, these insignificant, eliminating the intentional walk. And, we've tried to shorten the time in between innings and, trying to shave off 5 minutes to average game time, which by the way, they shaved off a few minutes this past year.
While they're trying to sell more advertising, by the way, right? Literally.
But my point is, and this is where I go back to the movie analogy, the idea for me isn't to take that 2.5-hour movie where I'm not really entertained and then suddenly it's just automatically better because it's 2 hours. The idea is whatever it is, whether it's 2.5 hours, whether it's 2 hours, 10 minutes, whether it's an hour and 45 minutes, I want to be captivated.
How do you like these cricket matches that go on like 4 days?
Right. I mean, we don't want that. As much as, I stayed up.
I don't think that's going to catch on in America. Yeah.
I stayed up for that 18-inning affair in the World Series, and look, I will never forget that, but I watched the last 7 innings from my bed, and I was tired, and I don't really want to duplicate that. But
all I'm saying is like the Barney Rubble, Fred Flintstone toothpicks in the eyes. I remember that as well.
But my point is, going back to what I said about more strikeouts than walks, and we've talked so much about how baseball has become more and more the 3 true outcomes: home runs, walks, strikeouts. The idea for me is to not take a 3-hour 5-game and then put a few kind of marginal changes into play, and then you shave it down by 10 minutes if we're still seeing the same thing, more strikeouts than hits. My point is, for me, it's much more about increasing the level of action in the game. We've seen strikeouts rise dramatically.
Well, all the stats say running's a bad idea, right? Like stealing, hit and run, all of those old Earl Weaver things, the nerds have generally eliminated the risk of anything that will cause you a premature out, which feels like a premature death. You get 27 deaths. Don't encourage any of them. Put your foot on the bag. To some degree, it is meant to be a more risk-free environment, which, for those of you to turn it political, turns it a little boring like Norway. You know what I mean? Like, it becomes more boring without risk, right?
Sure. And that's not to say stolen bases are bad, but they've found that if you're not stealing bases at an 80% success rate, thereabouts, there are different numbers that different studies.
Very few human beings can do that.
But the idea is, if you're someone who steals 30 bases, at first blush, we used to say, what? Oh, that's a pretty good base stealer. But if you get thrown out 24 times, that's not a very good percentage, right? I mean, think about how many outs you've run into there. So, but to get back to my point, for me,
there are a lot of guys that could steal 20 bases if they were going to get thrown out 15 times doing it, right?
Right. It's not efficient. In the same way that a quarterback, you don't want to be throwing it 60 times if you're only completing 27 of them. I mean, it's just not good. It's not efficient. So, but my point is, I'm not concerned with decreasing the length of the game nearly as much as I'm concerned with increasing the action level in the game. And that's where I think some of the changes that are being introduced in the Atlantic League, while I don't love all of them, I'm intrigued to see how it works out. And it's experimental. The Atlantic League is independent. It's not affiliated with Major League Baseball, other than now they have this kind of working agreement with Major League Baseball. But some of the changes they're going to introduce this year, what impact does that have on the game? And let me just run through them very quick. It came out late last week, so some people might be aware of it, some aren't, but we are going to see the first real testing of a robo-umpire. And what I mean by that, home plate umpire is going to be assisted in calling balls and strikes by TrackMan radar. Now, TrackMan is something that anyone who's familiar with analytics around baseball, TrackMan is all about, everything we're seeing with player movement and exit velocity and arm slot and break, how much movement of a pitch and all those different things. Teams are tracking this stuff, and TrackMan radar is now, it's in every ballpark. You're even seeing at the collegiate and even in some cases the high school level. But in the Atlantic League, they are going to test home plate umpires being assisted by basically a robot calling balls and strikes. We've talked about that a lot.
We've talked about the chip in the football, like whether above the uprights or through, whether it really was a first down or whether, we're going by the chain links with the chain gangs on the side. There's all of the science that could be put to work in this. To your point, doesn't make it any better. I just commented. By the way, our Facebook is up as well, and I've been doing some watch parties from time to time with some of this stuff, so I'm doing a little watch party on this. Anybody jumping in on this? But people are commenting about Manfred and leaving it alone and getting involved. And I said, look, part of this is I'm not sure anything they're doing here really appeals to a 12-year-old, but everything they're doing here is going to piss off the 90% old white guy, conservative, Trump voting, get off my lawn, it's been this way 100 years. That's what baseball is. I mean, and they're going to anger the people that like it the way it is, whatever the way it is, sure. Because that's the way old white people in America like things. They like it the way it used to be when Eisenhower was around. Moving 162 games, moving off of 9 innings, all of the changes to baseball that have created this home run, walk, strikeout thing have not been appealing to traditional baseball fans to some degree.
Sure.
The game's really in a lot of trouble for swimming in a lot of money right now, because I think we'll sit here all summer long while this Ratbird team loses 100 whatever games. These are going to be the only kind of concepts we're going to be talking about around here once they're 20 games under 500 on June 15th. And all of these topics still come back to where's little Nestor, where's little Luke, and where's little Luke in the 80s and little Nestor in the 70s loving baseball cards, loving all of this stuff, and now being distracted by, God knows, Luke, you taught children 10 years ago. Stuff, this stuff, phones, distracting these kids to make them want to go watch a baseball game because Ted Williams used to play and because the Orioles put a 2 and a 0 on the wall. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. It's much like leadership in Baltimore, and I'll spend the rest of my life talking about that. I don't see any great ideas here. These are ideas, to your point, to make the movie shorter. I don't know that any of them make the movie better.
Well, and that's the key for me. And I want to be very clear to anyone listening. I love baseball. I've absolutely continued to love baseball. But for anyone saying leave the game alone, the game has changed on its own. This is the game. If you want to see more strikeouts than hits, okay. But go back and look at 1975. It wasn't that way. Go look at Jim Palmer's strikeout rates compared to even an average Major League starting pitcher at this point. The game has changed dramatically. So you're saying you don't want it to change. It's changed. And my point is I'm not sure it's changing for the better. and that's what I'm concerned about. And look,
and I'm not sure that anything they're going to put in here that's a wedge will suddenly move the boat toward being young and hip and cool. You know what I mean? Like like your WWE is, or like you were at an NBA game on Sunday wearing Philadelphia gear because like you're moved to it. And I guess in Philadelphia, you were there. They were all moved to Bryce Harper. Baseball's become a little cooler there. And it is a little cyclical, but we're going into a period here where the game's not doing well, the city's not doing well, the franchise isn't doing well, their brand isn't doing well, and we're talking about upheaval at the fundamental part of the game, which we're going to be talking about all summer long. While people already aren't watching, there are going to be some baseball fans that come back here 5 years from now might not recognize it.
Yeah, and I think that's where you do have to be careful. Look, I'm not looking for changes that are going to make baseball like lacrosse, like football. I mean, it's the game, and at some point in time, what we all need to recognize, and we've talked about this before, it's nothing new. Every sport in America is a niche at this point, other than the NFL. I mean, it's just the case. I mean, look at the ratings for even some of the most appealing NBA games. Even for the most appealing Major League Baseball games.
By the way, that is a fascinating study, right? That someone like me, who's no longer into the NBA, would come back to it, right? And be into it again in some tangible way, that once you lose your taste for listening to Led Zeppelin, whether you ever go back to it or not, right? Like, and people have left baseball in our community, and it's up to John Angelos and Lou Angelos and John Vitelin, if they can get him off the back of a milk carton somewhere, to reinvigorate this in some way. And I don't know that they have the capability to do any of that. And if they're not doing it, then Rob Manfred must, or that Masson must, or that some player must be transcendent in some sort of we already got rid of Manny Machado, we got rid of him too. Chris Dave. Okay, I don't know what's going to bring people back, but it is fascinating. Like, for my friends, and this is a deeper conversation even, but that's where we're going. A guy like you, right? You don't like hockey, dude, right? Like, you're not a hockey guy.
Right.
I am admittedly not a lacrosse guy. I will never be an MMA guy. I can't imagine a time in my life where I'm going to sit around on Saturday night and watch two guys beat the hell out of each other. I'm just not interested in it. I just have other things going on with that hour in my day, And I wonder what makes someone become an MMA. Not someone like me that's fundamentally against violence in front of children on television, thinking it makes the world a worse place, because it does. I don't need any studies or any nerds to tell me that. But what would make a guy like you go to a hockey game when hockey's trying to not only get your kid to, when your kid comes along, your worst nightmare is your kid loves hockey and hates baseball, right? Because you're going to freeze your ass off in a hockey rink. I've gone through that with a couple of friendships. Your kid likes soccer and you don't like soccer, or, whatever it is. But you love baseball because your dad did. I love baseball because my dad did. We moved in that direction. I really do wonder, for all of these sports that are always trying to reach the person they don't have, whoever that person is. Hockey has been trying to get you for 30 years, and you're not letting them have you. And you are their prime guy. You love sports, you love action, you love, you even love the fighting part of it because, like, you love wrestling. You have that bent in you. And hockey wants you to leave baseball and come to them because it's so much a better sport. And all of these sports do that. They're trying to get someone they don't have. Baseball is walking a really danger area here, right, where they've got what they've got, and what they've got's going to die, but they better not lose what they got because they're trying to sell it off to get something they don't have that they might never get, literally, right?
Sure, and part of this is there's just there are only so many hours in the day.
That's why I'm doing Baltimore Positive.
Anyone.
Bingo, brother. You got it.
Right. I mean, but that's just the reality. Now,
Fact.
People who do it for a living, like us, now, I don't have to pay attention to hockey, but if I had to for my job, I would. And I have in the past. So But for the
and I talked about
consumer,
Hans devices on national radio, for Sporting News Radio, NASCAR. When Dale Earnhardt goes into a wall, we all become Hans device experts, I guess, right?
No question. So part of it is that, but I think in the case of any sport, there is a fine line between not wanting to alienate your current fan base with trying to grow your fan base and to make it younger, because we're all going to die at some point. I'm not saying that to be morbid. It's just the truth. And you want something to continue to be viable and to continue to be successful. And look, I don't think baseball is in a colossal crisis any more than at any other point where it appeared baseball or any sport is in a crisis. Much of this is cyclical. However, when you look at how the game has changed really over the last decade, but you can go back a little bit longer than that if you want to, the game has changed dramatically. So what the Atlantic League is doing, and let me run through some of these.
Yeah, I got the list in front of me because this is new to me. Banning shifts? Wow.
Yeah, which is interesting from the standpoint of anyone who says that they're a purist. Well, other than Ted Williams back in, the 40s, the shift, no one used the shift. I mean, maybe there were a few players across the entire league where you'd move over a little bit, but what they want to do is require two infielders to be on each side of second base when a pitch is released. Now, pitch is released, does that prevent the shortstop from running over to the other side of second base? Sure. You can do that, but that's something they're testing. Much like we've talked about the possibility here in Major League Baseball, pitchers must face a minimum of 3 batters, or they reach the end of an inning, or they get hurt. How will that work out? We'll see. I'll be honest, that's not one I'm a big fan of because of just this idea that you're restricting substitution of a pitcher. But I understand that bullpen usage has increased and continues to increase, and it's something that's not going away. So whether you limit the number of pitchers on the roster at any given time, or you do have a 3-batter requirement, it's something to look at. No mound visits, which I'll be totally honest with you, Nestor, I'm fine with that. Last year we limited the number of mound visits in Major League Baseball for the first time to 6, and to be honest, I'm not sure I can recall.
Dude, if every mound visit were mic'd, literally, right, in the history of mound visits, because in the old days, guys would come out, scratch their nuts. All right, Skip, hey, I just came out here to give you a breather, right. Hey, did you see that girl in the 3rd row over there? I got her number. That's the kind of stuff that used to be said at the mound. Sure. It's never, hey, watch out for this guy. You talk about all that stuff at 3:30 when you get to the ballpark, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that, but yes, you're right. Most of it was to change the pace. Oh, there goes that term pace again. It's changing the pace of what's happening.
Hey, Pudge, get out there and cool him off. Hey, take a walk around behind the mound. Have him rosin up a little bit. Have him scratch his nuts. That's what every pitch. That's what every mound visit's been from the history of mankind.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, there's some exceptions, and there might be one talking point that a pitching coach has in a big spot in the 7th inning. With the bases loaded and 2 outs. And
you know what, dude? I went to the bullfights once in Madrid, and I don't recommend this, okay? I don't know if you've ever been to a bullfight or not. It's kind of gross. It's kind of morbid, but nothing happens. But, to any Spaniard or anyone that's sort of into bullfighting, they would tell you there's it's like going to opera. Don't do that either. But there's all of this stuff that's involved if you're a nerd about it that, the human eye doesn't see. All you see is the bull getting stuck. I think that's sort of baseball to some degree, right? There's some prancing around, and, in Latin culture, yelling at the umpire and coming out and whistling and prancing around. That's all part of the theater of it. It's kind of like a telenovela in Mexico, on Telemundo. It's part of the dance. And there's so much of baseball that's part of the dance, right? Like the driving in of the bullpen cart, all of that stuff, throwing the ball around between innings, all of that stuff that adds pageantry to the game that we've accepted, but to a kid, it's like, dude, I'm on my phone. Wake me when they start playing again, right?
Right. And something that's interesting about this is, how do kids respond to the game. And look, there are plenty of kids that still like baseball. I taught fifth grade for 5 years. I had plenty of students who liked baseball. Now, was it as
and a lot more that like lacrosse lately?
Was it as many as 20 years ago, 30 years ago? That maybe not. But I think that's also just, there are just so many more activities compared to if you were a kid growing up 40 years ago, you might have had 2, maybe 3 sports you could play over the course of the whole year.
Dude, let's stop, too. Let's just say this. If you're a 6-year-old kid, when you're playing basketball, you're moving around, you're dribbling. You're playing lacrosse, you're learning how to pick up. You're playing soccer, you're kicking the ball.
Sure.
You're playing football. It's a little more, certainly not 6-year-olds playing football at this point, but there's more to learn and plays and downs and distance. Baseball, there's which way do I run and where do I go and all of those things that we laugh at, kids playing t-ball and whatnot, but it's a much more complicated thing to learn as a 6-year-old where, especially if mom doesn't understand it and dad doesn't understand it all that well, throwing them out there and having them run around and kick a soccer ball is a very easy thing to do.
Yeah, sure. And, there's some of that, but, some of these, and look, I don't think some of these changes are really going to make that big of a difference. I think you do need to be careful not to. That's why some of these suggestions you've heard off and on the last couple of years, where a team could pick any of their 3 hitters to bat in the 9th inning. And no, that's not baseball. The beauty of the game is that you do have to wait your turn, and you can't send LeBron James to the plate every single time when you're down by 2 runs. That's baseball, and that's the beauty of it. And that's where I want to be very careful here. And when I talk about some of these changes, and as someone who does want to see baseball at least explore being more progressive, that you don't lose the essence of the game.
Well, you put your foot down on this, and it's going to be interesting to see in the end who has the biggest foot. We're going to continue our conversation on baseball. All of our WNST coverage and baseball coverage and continuing baseball coverage brought to you by our friends at Lightbridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. I'm wearing the hat. They're up in Owings Mills. The new game plan for sports-related injuries backed by the surgeons, the doctors who treat the pro athletes. Cal Ripken, speaking of baseball, on the billboards, on the ads you hear at WNST.net. I've had my left elbow fixed. My wife's training for a half marathon. She's been using the folks there for some orthopedic needs and seeing Dr. Craig Bennett and getting some help as well. Lightbridge Health Sports Medicine Institute, Foundry Row in Owings Mills. They are the new game plan for sports-related injuries. Also, our friends at Strategic Factory, the marketing, the printing, the promotional goods of all kinds, all in one shop at Owings Mills. Hats like this, shirts like this, cups, whatever. I need some business cards. I'm going to see Strategic Factory, and you can see them as well. Also, our friends at Royal Farms are real fresh, real fast. The tasty coffee, the Kona blend, and, of course, using the ROFO rewards card or the app will get you the points when you're pumping your gas. You get your coffee free. And I'm into some Western fries with some ketchup and some fried chicken as well. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also, our friends at the Modell Lyric. Check out the website for everything that's going on at the Modell Lyric. I am certainly looking forward to Bill Maher on June 9. I'm also looking forward to the Frank Zappa hologram show on May 3rd. I've not seen a hologram show. I've seen videos of hologram shows, but this is going to be cool. We're also going to be talking to the folks, putting that on and putting together the technology, which I'm really excited about that. And, of course, Zappa with the whole Baltimore thing, so it's awesome. Maybe Dweezil will come on, too. There's a rumor Dweezil Zappa will be joining me. Luke is here. He is Luke at WNST.net, and, of course, Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. We're into baseball and baseball rules changes. Explain to everybody the Atlantic League and all of this stuff, sort of the reset where we are, because anyone that wants to see a robotic umpire will have that opportunity in York, Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, and let's be very clear about this. This isn't going to be a robot standing behind the catcher.
It says TrackMan. I see TrackMan as sort of like that thing that jumps on the screen during Fox football telecast.
Yeah, it's not quite that. TrackMan, all this StatCast data that we're getting with exit velocity and player movement and route efficiency for outfielders chasing after a ball, this is all based in TrackMan, and it's all about radar. You're tracking all of the players. You're tracking the ball, all of that. You're tracking that, and in this case, it's going to assist the home plate umpire in calling balls and strikes. How does that help the game? Okay, well, we'll have a more consistent strike zone. We're always chasing that, right? We're talking about that in the NFL with instant replay and expanding replay. It will also hypothetically deter catchers from trying to frame pitches, because if it crosses the plate, it's a strike. Not so much how the catcher presents the ball in ways of trying to trick the umpire, so to speak. But we have that. We've already talked about no mound visits, pitchers facing a minimum of 3 hitters. One we haven't talked about that I think is interesting, increasing the size of first, second, and third base from 15 inches square to 18 inches square. I think that could be a player safety thing as much as anything else. We saw this with Manny Machado in the playoffs, intentional or not, but we've seen accidental cases of the first baseman going for a ball in the dirt, he moves his foot, and then the base runner steps on the back of his ankle and either causes an injury to the runner or to the first baseman. So making the bases a little bit bigger, I think that's, like I said, that to me feels a little more of a player safety initiative, although certainly if you're trying to slide and hook slide or sneak your hand in, you can make an argument there's more real estate to get your hand in on the bag. So we talked about no shifts, but here's the interesting one, Nestor, and this is the one that I think has a lot of people up in arms. We've always thought about 60 feet 6 inches as being sacred, and I understand that. At the same time, there's more velocity in this game than there's ever been. You think about pitchers in the 80s and the 90s compared to where pitchers are here in 2019. The average velocity for pitchers, especially in the bullpen, is incredible. And at some point in time, it's just guys are throwing as hard as they can. And that just wasn't the case 30 years ago. Jim Palmer threw as many innings as he did because he wasn't going max, throw as hard as I can every single pitch. That, quite frankly, even starters are doing to a more dramatic degree in this day and age. That's why starters are going 5 or 6 innings as opposed to 8 or 9, because it's all about velocity and trying to miss bats. And the best way to get a hitter out, to guarantee that a hitter's not going to do damage to you, is to do what? Strike them out. They can't bloop a ball into center field if they're not hitting the ball. So there's so much of that at work. Pitchers are so much stronger. Weight training and conditioning is much more advanced. And I mentioned it, we've had more strikeouts than hits in the 2018 season. So what the Atlantic League is experimenting with in the second half of the season is they are moving the rubber back 2 feet. It will be 62 feet 6 inches. I'm fascinated to see how that's going to happen. And I want to be clear, I'm not endorsing automatically that Major League Baseball should do this.
Well, 5 feet should make it easier to hit the baseball, right?
Sure. And, but what's the perfect distance? My first reaction, when I consider the reaction time that hitters have and how quickly they need to react, I'm guessing 2 feet is going to lead to a spike in offense. I'm guessing that's probably a little too much, but I could be wrong on that. I don't know. That's why you test it out. And I think what's going to be most interesting, even though I wouldn't say that's the case for pitchers in the Atlantic League who are trying to either hold on or trying to get to the major leagues, is what impact does it have on their health? I mean, you are talking about fundamentally changing pitching here, and it's something that shouldn't be done in haste, and that's why you're seeing a unaffiliated minor league baseball experimenting with this, because no team would want their double-A prize prospect to suddenly just be pitching from 2 feet further back. I mean, it's something that needs to be, this is a case study. This is a snapshot. I think they want to see how the offense looks under this structure, and they want to see how the pitchers do in this structure. And I think the thought is you start with something a little more dramatic, and then you can adjust it. And let's face it, if the Atlantic League, when they start, when they move the mound back in the second half of this coming season, and scoring is up 4 runs a game, guess what's going to happen probably 2 or 3 weeks in? They'll probably adjust it and say, okay, let's try 1 foot back rather than 2 feet back, because let's be clear, I don't want baseball to become 17 to 16 either. I don't want it to become that. Well,
then you're going to have 4-hour games if everybody hits the ball, right?
Exactly. So this is all about trying to find the sweet spot. And in the case of what the Atlantic League is doing, what is problematic is you have 7 or 8 changes going on. In the same way that in a science experiment, if you have 7 or 8 variables you're changing, what the heck's going on? Like, it's going to be different, but what the heck is causing it? And that's what's going to be challenging here. But I think from a standpoint of just looking for some anecdotal evidence, what does the product look like? I mean, you mentioned it. I live 25 minutes from where the York Revolution play. They're in the Atlantic League. I'm planning to go to a couple games this year to kind of see what this looks like, just from a baseball fan perspective. I don't want it to look like a completely different game, and I think if we're all being fair, changes have always come. I mean, the DH didn't ruin baseball, but lots of people thought it might in the early 70s, and it turned out, I think, okay. I've always been more of an American League brand of baseball. I think watching pitchers hit is painfully dull and boring. And why? Because they're terrible at it. Even the best pitchers that we champion, Madison Bumgarner or Mike Hampton years ago, or seeing Bartolo Colon hit a home run.
Yeah, that's part of the 2.5-hour movie you could cut out, right? Literally.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah. You wait for something that happens, I don't know, once every 2 weeks. You'll see the pitcher do something that's of mild interest. It's terrible. So my point is, the game has always changed. The game is not what it was in 1980. It's not what it was in 1950. Heck, there was a time when 60 feet 6 inches was not, that wasn't the distance. There was a time that the role of the pitcher was not to get the batter out. The role of the pitcher was to serve up a nice, easy pitch for the hitter to hit. That was the original purpose of the pitcher in baseball. So I understand that purist predicament and concern, and I don't want to see the game become something that I don't even recognize, but my point of contention is it already kind of has, in probably not positive ways when we're talking about strikeouts being up to the degree that they are, and walks being up to the degree that they are. And, okay, home runs continue to be there, but the overall just amount of action, the average time between balls being put in play has gone up. And so what does that mean? Much more sitting around. And for young people, even though they're not playing it at a major league level, it's more standing around then, hypothetically speaking. So are there 2 or 3 things that we can introduce? And when I talk about this, more than just saying, okay, we're no longer going to have a pitcher throw 4 pitches for an intentional walk. We're just going to put them on first base. And sure, we can try to shorten the time between innings another 10 seconds, another 15 seconds. You can do more of the in-game ads that we're starting to see where you have a split screen and they have a commercial while you're still able to watch the action on the field. Yeah, you can.
We have that during movies now on television.
Sure, yeah. Exactly. But the point is, and this goes back to my movie analogy, if a movie is dull and it's too long, guess what? You can shorten it, but if the movie's still dull and there's still not a whole lot going on, it can go from 2:15 to 2 hours, and I'm still not going to like it. What I want is whatever that's going to be. And yeah, can we shave down some time for average length of game? Sure, knock yourself out. But what I'm more concerned about is making that time within the game, whatever it might be, more engaging. And is there something we can do to try to figure that out? And if it means we need to move the mound back 6 inches, and that will get us back to a point where we at least have more strikeouts than hits again, or more hits than strikeouts again, then I'm willing to entertain that because...
Hey, by the way, if you had to bet $1 right now, you're going to go on or against that for the season.
What's that?
Do you think it'll be a second year of more strikeouts than hits this year?
In Major League Baseball?
Yes.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like an outlier. It feels like this is the way the game's going.
Yeah, because I think you look at where the trend... I mean, the trend has... strikeouts have gone up and hits have gone down. And, some of that has to do with walks. And could robo-ump assistance help with that? Maybe. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you could have the idea that pitchers have to pitch to the strike zone rather than chasing strikes along the edges, and catchers aren't going to be trying to, quote, steal strikes as much, and maybe you'll get a little bit more with that. But for me, all of these issues we can talk about as many rule changes as we want. We can talk about as much, how dramatic we want to be or not in attempting to change the game. But it comes down to this. We need to have more balls put in play. And that's where the game has changed dramatically. And I'm not saying moving the mound back is going to automatically solve that, but I'm willing to at least explore it in an unaffiliated, independent minor league and see what happens there. And then Major League Baseball can take some of this data and figure out what the next step is. To be very clear, I'm not someone that's just saying move the mound back and ban the shift and do this and do that and do that, because if we're going to make changes, I want it to be changes for the good, and I don't want to completely alienate baseball's fan base in the process, and we got to be careful with this, but at the same time, the way the game is going, I'm not sure it's trending in a direction that's going to mean that the game's maintaining long-term, even sustainability, let alone growth. I mean, you want to grow the sport, and that's where you and I have argued about the Little League uniforms that they wore for Players Weekend and names on the back. And look, it's silly to guys like you and me because we're more purists, but if a 10-year-old's really excited about the fact that Manny Machado was wearing a neon orange jersey for the Orioles a couple years ago, Players Weekend, and they get excited about that, and they want an Orioles hat just like that, then by all means, I can put up with it for a weekend. Or in the case of some of these rule changes, I can put up with what my sense of normal is changing just a little bit if it means that it becomes a better game and if I think that that's going to attract more fans over the long haul. I don't want anything dramatic. I want to look at some of these things in a testing situation, a testing environment, and see what happens. And it might be that moving the mound back creates a lot of arm injuries. Well, then we know that, that's out, and we need to figure something else out. And maybe it has to do with maybe you make the ball a tiny bit heavier. Maybe that impact, does that impact velocity? I don't know. I think there are, my point is, ideas need to be on the table because the game is already changing dramatically on its own, and I don't think it's in a very positive way. So what can we do to kind of combat that? What can we do to reverse that trend and get the game back to being a little bit more action oriented, more balls put in play, fewer strikeouts? I don't want strikeouts eliminated. I still love the one-on-one pitcher versus hitter, but there was always plenty of that. But you're seeing strikeout rates continue to climb, and walks continue to go up, and hits are going down. And as far as balls being put in play, we've talked about the shift and things like that. So maybe we need to make a few adjustments here to better the game for the long run. I like the line of thinking, while also making it very clear, I love baseball. And me individually, if you say you're not going to change anything, okay, but I want the game to continue to, I want the game to thrive. I want the game to survive. I want it to continue to be viable. And if we can make even just a couple subtle adjustments to improve that, then I'm all for it.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Rules changes, baseball coming down the pipe. This season won't be all that interesting on the field from a wins and losses perspective. We will be taking on all sorts of issues. I made a short list for Luke of all the crap we're going to be talking about with baseball. I called it the stupid baseball list. Expansion, designated hitter in the NL, labor peace, which there's not going to be any of, postseason expansion, which at some point they'll try to make more money off of and play World Series games at Thanksgiving, pitch clock, which we've been talking about for half an hour, analytics and Sabre, the value of a manager, we'll find that out with Brandon Hyde, difference in the postseason, because it's a different sport in the postseason, it really is. Appealing to kids, well, that was part of this one. Value of FanFest, yeah, we'll talk about that. And going to a minor league baseball game, of which Luke and I are going to do this summer. We're going to minor league baseball this year. I've made up my mind. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.